Welcome to UNCAGED, a show that celebrates thought leadership from today's top business leaders. The program provides a voice to amazing executives from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. Today, we are speaking with Bill Pazos. Hey, Bill, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bill, I'm excited to talk to you. Bill Pazos is the co-founder and managing director of AirCarbon, which is a carbon exchange offering the lowest fees in the industry and an architecture which will allow the carbon market to expand efficiently and fulfill its true potential and helping meet the world's net zero goals. So excellent discussion and great topic that we're all thinking about these days. But before we get into the discussion on AirCarbon, tell us a little bit about your background, Bill.
Well, I started my career in finance with what's now JP Morgan as a bond trader, and then went on to manage hedge funds. It was a relatively small hedge fund that ended up being medium-sized for the current industry. Sold out of it at the end of around 98, and then in 2000 I discovered the carbon markets. Built a company from the ground up called EcoInvest, which became one of the largest aggregators of carbon credits during the first Kyoto phase. I sold that company to Bunge, the commodities firm, and then shortly thereafter became the global head of carbon origination and finance for Standard Bank out of South Africa. And then in 2012, I left the carbon markets, promised myself never to go back. One of the problems with the carbon markets is that price and scarcity is a function of political will. And we can talk about that in the future. But anyway, I was in 2018, we were approached by the Singapore government, specifically Enterprise Singapore, to build a digital carbon exchange in Singapore. And so here we are 3 years later, operating and doing well.
That's excellent. And yes, you're always pulled back into the carbon world. Well, I think it's when the world sees a true expert on a topic, especially one that's as important and growing as this one, they're going to find a way to pull you back, Bill. So tell me more about what you guys are doing at the AirCarbon Exchange.
Well, when we looked at the market 3 years ago, we came up with a very simple concept. Which is to bring traditional commodities architecture to the carbon markets. And sort of the best way to explain that is through a very sort of hokey analogy that I always bring up. If you look at traditional commodities, the commodity itself sits in a warehouse, and what trades on the exchange are digital receipts that point to the commodity that's in the warehouse. The way the carbon markets trade is completely opposite to that, more closer to, sailboats, for example. If you were to buy a carbon credit, it's mostly an over-the-counter market, and you buy carbon credits by having an in-depth discussion about the underlying carbon credit. Where was it? Where did the savings happen? What kind of a project is it? What registry? What vintage? Et cetera, et cetera. And it's impossible to scale a market that way. It would be the equivalent of basically trading soybeans on a truck by truck basis, right? Driving a truck around Chicago looking for a buyer. You can't scale a market that way. So that's what we've created for the carbon markets.
So you've made it so that it's basically like a like-for-like market. It's easier for someone to just say, I want to buy a carbon credit. I don't really want to care. I don't care where it is or what it is. Just I'm buying a carbon credit.
Well, the idea is that instead of having a warehouse, what we have is a trust. And we define the kind of carbon credits that are eligible in each individual trust, right? So there may be someone that wants to buy carbon credits that are generated by forestry projects, and they must be of a specific quality and have a specific sort of sort of level of diligence around it. And so what we do is we create a trust. And if you have a carbon credit that you want to sell that fits into that basket, then you put it into the trust and you can trade and buy into it very quickly, right? That's very important because there's literally trillions of dollars in the hedge fund industry that's sitting there and saying, how do we go long this asset class?
Yeah.
Right. Because everybody knows that we're going into a carbon constrained world, but how do you invest in carbon? And today, the only way to do it is on a project by project basis. And that makes it impossible for large hedge funds, for example, to deploy money.
So that's a really
no
interesting point. That's a really interesting point. So I'm curious, just so I understand, sometimes a business would have to perhaps invest in or aim to invest in a carbon credit linked specifically to a form of carbon, I guess, storage in a way related to specific industries. Basically, is that what you're saying? So like if it's a timber related thing, there may be something there. If it's agriculture related, it may be that. If it's
it might be geography. It might be, you want a carbon credit from a specific geography.
Okay.
But you don't need to have a million different carbon credits. You can box them into baskets, and that can unlock a lot of capital. And if you unlock speculative capital, what that does is it'll create price pressure on carbon credits. Price of carbon goes up. That means more money will be invested in carbon mitigating activities, because they know that they will be able to, sell the resulting carbon credits at a high price in the market.
Yeah. Well, so I can see the complexity there, and I love the fact that you guys are obviously trying to make it more scalable, that will actually allow it to be much more efficient as an asset class. Tell me a little bit more about what's happening in the broader carbon marketplace right now. I mean, what are some of the big trends that you're seeing?
Well, I think the biggest trend, and we all see it, is that not a day goes by that another large corporate doesn't announce that they're going to be carbon neutral, carbon negative, net zero, or one of these. And all that means is I'm going to buy carbon credits. That's literally all it means, because companies can reduce their carbon emissions up to a point. But after that point, they can't do it within their own infrastructure. So if you think of, I don't know, any company, Ford, Amazon, they can put in all the efficiencies they want, but at a certain point, they have a carbon footprint they need to offset. And so that means they have to go out in the market and buy carbon credits so that the sum of their carbon footprint is net zero. And so, it's just painfully obvious. What's crazy is, and this is underreported. If you look at one of our contracts, for example, our global nature contract, at the beginning of the year, it was trading at $1.50 a ton. It's currently at $15 a ton. I mean, it makes Bitcoin look, pretty pale in comparison. It's a huge jump. It's an excellent performing asset.
Do you think that people outside of the larger institutions have any idea of how to invest in something like this? I mean,
well, that's what happens, right? I mean, I'm sure that there's some very smart people in these large institutions, and they're
making a lot of money.
they have to, they know we're moving into a carbon constrained world. They grab some analyst and say, go find out how we can go along this asset class. And the person comes back and reports that, well, you've got to buy a forest in the Amazon, and there are all these risks, and there's government risk, there's this risk, there's that risk, and so they turn their back on it. So that's what we're trying to get rid of, that friction, that barrier to entry, so that someone can say, I want to go long forestry projects. They can just buy an asset, they're long the asset class. There's a tradable bid offer on screen. So there's clearly that brings the ability to do mark to market and other types of activities.
So tell me, Bill, we've been in this lovely pandemic, pseudo lockdown, moments of freedom stage of our lives. And now we seem to be living with this new variant, Omicron. Tell me more about how that has impacted your business and perhaps offered growth or operational challenges.
I think it's been interesting, actually fascinating on many fronts. One of the things the sort of history of the carbon markets, that you had the Kyoto Protocol and all that other good stuff, and then we had this thing in 2008, which was the global financial crisis, and that destroyed the carbon markets because basically governments around the world said, "Well, climate change, yeah, but we can't afford it. We've got this
we have
problem.
to get our economies just going again."
Right.
Exactly.
And what's really interesting is that this pandemic has been the equivalent of a global financial crisis. However, climate change, we're actually coming out of this pandemic, maybe a little bit stronger than when we first came into it.
Right.
So people are turning to clean energy, carbon trading as a solution to get out of this sort of economic malaise that's caused by COVID, and not as a unaffordable type of a nice to have type of thing. So that's been super interesting. The other thing that's been great is these Zoom calls and Microsoft Teams and all this stuff. We've all sort of learned to interact remotely, and that has, in my mind, it's increased my quality of life. And it's taken me off planes as much as even though I did travel significantly last year, but nothing compared to my usual.
Yeah, I try to be as good as I can be in terms of my own carbon footprint. I'm a bit of a, probably classic child of a Scandinavian, where I don't drive a car, I don't have a car, but oh my God, do I fly in a lot of planes. And and I know that clearly is a huge issue from a personal contribution to carbon. I mean, what do you recommend for people like me on how we deal with that?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing you need to do is become conscious of it, right? I think prior to this whole COVID thing, I think I jumped on airplanes a little too quickly. Mm-hmm. And now, that I'm convinced that we can do a lot of business remotely. I've reduced the amount of travel significantly. And then what you need to do is, offset your emissions, calculate them and offset them. There are some good companies out there. There are others that are just dismal and are out there to make a buck. You have to sort of be careful because of this opacity that we're trying to destroy in the market. People are able to mark up carbon credits, 5 times their actual price and sell it to sort of consumers that are unaware of the true cost of offsetting.
Well, Bill, I hope you can help us with getting more transparency, certainly from an asset class perspective. Tell me a little bit about how you're imagining next year is going to look for this market.
It's basically doubling every year. This market's going to just, everybody's talking about carbon prices in the 50 to 100 range. We went from less than $1 to $15 this year. We'll probably close the year closer to 30 than to 15. And so the markets are gonna definitely rally all throughout the year. There's going to be significant investment in more carbon mitigating activities. Mm-hmm. For us personally, we're opening the exchange in Rio, so we'll have a footprint in Latin America. We will open the exchange in Abu Dhabi as well, so we'll have a footprint in the Middle East. So that'll complement the exchange in Singapore, and then we have plans which may or may not actually gel during 2022 to open up in Africa.
Wow. Well, Bill, it's been amazing hearing what you guys are doing. And clearly you are at the center of this discussion on how we build the sustainable future. If someone wanted to learn more about what you guys are doing with the AirCarbon exchange, where would somebody find you?
Well, aircarbon.co is the website. And yeah, that would be the best place to start.
Well, we have been speaking with Bill Pazos. He's the co-founder and managing director of AirCarbon, which is a frictionless carbon exchange offering the lowest fees in the industry and an architecture which will allow the carbon market to expand efficiently and fulfill its true potential in helping the world meet net zero. Bill has been educating us all on what's happening in the world of carbon. And I'm realizing that this is probably one of the most important growth areas for anyone to be thinking about it and considering, and certainly something that every business has to get their head around. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Bill, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Cheers.
Cheers.